Hello there, and welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week I'm joined by Greg Cass, aka IonCanon, and Jen Sopchockchai Bankard from the Long Take Review to celebrate Kathleen Kennedy. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Also, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it is time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost conversations. Boy, do we have another excellent installment of the podcast for you all here today. You may have heard in the news over the last couple of weeks, there has been some rumblings about Kathleen Kennedy, the president of Lucasfilm, and her potential retirement, and that caused a whole array of opinions and comments about Kathleen and her work over the last 13 years as the president of Lucasfilm. And it turns out that she is still staying as president for the time being, and will be working on finding a successor and when that time comes. But nothing announced so far, and that she'll be the one to tell you that rather than from hearing it from a news source or from a leak or something like that. So that is kind of the update there. And because of that outpouring of opinion and all that stuff, I figured it would be a great conversation to celebrate Kathleen Kennedy, because I think a lot of that conversation was negative and not in good faith, in my opinion. So, of course, we have Greg Cass, aka IonCanon, from the Long Take Review podcast as well, and some other things online. Returning guest for the show, of course, you all know Greg, and I really appreciate his insights. But we also have a new guest on the show. Jen Sopchockchai Bankard is here. She also co-hosts of the Long Take Review podcasts, and they do excellent work over there. And she also has the Long Take Review Substack, and just a truly wonderful group of people for this panel here. I think you're all going to really enjoy it. But before we get into that big conversation over on the other side of this segment here, we have some news. Cloud City Gossip. It's time to dive into all the rumblings and the news that's taken place in the Lucasfilm Galaxy and the adjacent side of things over the past week. And starting off with Andor season 1, there's a look back kind of hour-long interview with Tony Gilroy and some of the cast that's now available on YouTube. So there's some great tidbits about the filming process for season 1 and some looks ahead at what we can expect in season 2. But frankly, the main takeaway that I have is expect the unexpected. It seems like there's going to be a lot of, I guess you would say, variety of where we should expect this show to go based off of the reactions and mumblings that I got from the cast and crew that participated in that endeavor. If you want to go check it out for yourself, again, it's on YouTube. Just search for Andor and the StarWars.com YouTube page or something like that, and I'm sure you'll be able to find it with relative ease. Speaking of Andor, again, season 1 is now available on Hulu, and also the first arc, the first 3 episodes, are available on YouTube for free. Seems like they're really doing everything they possibly can to get the word out about Andor, and that Andor season 2 is coming out very soon. And they really want to get people excited for this, based off of the trailers and special looks that they've shown so far. They're trying to cast that wide net for everybody. I think they also want to. I will say, I believe that they think that this is a really excellent project, I would say, across the board with how they've been marketing it so far. This seems like almost like an awards consideration marketing campaign so far, and that just seems awesome that they have such confidence behind their product and all that. So can't wait to see it. But if you haven't actually checked it out yet, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast if you haven't watched Andor yet. Go check those out, and now it's available in more places, so you can tell your friends and family about it as well. Some surprising news that came out this week, and in fact, just yesterday it came out. Light and Magic, the wonderful documentary about ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, on Disney Plus, is getting a second season. Well, we kind of knew it was getting a second season, but the fact that it's officially confirmed and that it's coming out sooner than we ever expected, at least I didn't expect. April 18th, we're getting 3 new episodes of Light and Magic that will take place in roughly the 90s, according to Joe Johnston and team, who is now taking up the directing duties from Lawrence Kasdan for the second season. Where the first season kind of roughly teetered off around Jurassic Park, this is going to take place or pick up the story, I should say, after that. So it's going to talk about Pirates of the Caribbean, depending on how you'd like to pronounce it. That's a joke, an inside joke from a while back. Casper and Twister, many other things probably over the next over that time span, and probably bring us up to a more fresh look at the activities of today for ILM. So very excited for that. Can't wait to chat about that when the time comes. If you're a fan of the EU, you just got a big news announcement in the last week too. If you also are close to a Galaxy's Edge or you got an eBay on account ready, if you're a fan of the Heir to the Empire trilogy and other stories, there's a character named Mara Jade, who is like an assassin force user for the Emperor, and her lightsaber hilt, is now available at Galaxy's Edge. So both Batu East and Batu West, you can go pick this up now if you want, or if you want to pay a little extra bucks, I imagine, and get it off of eBay, that is certainly another option for you as well. So go check that out if you're interested. Finally, I will say, in terms of big news for this week, last week there was the event called South by Southwest, and there's some more details that came out about the new Mandalorian and Grogu update for the Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run ride at Galaxy's Edge. So the new adventure featuring Mando and Grogu, I don't know how it's going to happen. It's going to premiere on May 22nd, 2026, which corresponds with the current release date for the film The Mandalorian and Grogu. Now, concept art of this endeavor showcases adventures in Tatooine and Bespin as places we will go. Not sure if that's like one story is going to Tatooine, another one's going to Bespin. If it's going to kind of be like a mix and match, or if it's like a each time you go to one and then you go to the other. I don't know. We'll find out. But it's just nice to see some concept art around this. Additionally, they confirmed that BDX droids, so these little droids that kind of walk around, I've seen them in person in Anaheim. They are a delight. They were previously only available in Anaheim, and now they're coming to Walt Disney World, Tokyo Disneyland, and Disneyland Paris. And then Zelen should be accompanying them too, it seems, based off of the press release. But that's awesome. And additionally, the droids will be featured in the Mandalorian and Grogu film. So another way to super closely tie in everything that you're going to be experiencing here. And maybe if all goes according to plan, I'm manifesting that Mandalorian and Grogu drop down in Batu, and that would make it for a more cohesive experience too across the way. So the droids will also make their debut around the globe in May 2026, again corresponding with the release date of the film and the launch of the new update for Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run. Now, I'm excited for this update for sure. I do wonder if that means we'll lose the current iteration of it forever, or if they'll have a season for it and then bring it back and just kind of make it a different experience every so often for folks. I am curious about that, because I do really like the ride in its current iteration, very much so. And I love how it kind of ties into the Resistance in that episode 8.5, the in between 8 and 9 era. So I think it'll just be important to learn more in the future about this, but I'm also kind of trying to keep an open mind as we go about this then. Finally, before we get into our main segment and topic of the day, we do have a question. If you recall, or you hear in the preamble every episode, we do have a Patreon site. Just search for Force Ghost Conversations on Patreon. And for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to a ton of different Force Ghost Conversations goodies, including exclusive episodes, the chance to a lot of things. Go check it out. But primarily, you get the opportunity to ask questions that will then be answered on the show. So our wonderful patron, Daz, has sent in a question for us to be read and to be answered, of course, too. So here it is. Daz asks, "Hey, Anthony, with Celebration Japan just around the corner now, what things would be top of your wish list for announcements or updates?" Now, this is a great question, Daz, because if you had asked me perhaps 2 weeks ago, I would have given you a completely different answer. But I'm glad that this has now been asked, knowing that the panel schedule is released. So the big main panels for the 3-day convention are the Mandalorian and Grogu getting a big panel on that Friday, Andor Season 2, Ahsoka Season 2, and on Saturday. And then finally on Sunday, Visions Volume 3 will be getting a panel as well. So my wish list for announcements, I don't necessarily know if there will be big announcements, because I think they've, whatever, for whatever reason, leaks or however you want to call it for the Mandalorian and Grogu have already happened. I think that Jeremy Allen White is probably one that they wish they could have announced at Celebration. Um, that's probably how it works there. But I will say, I think you'll get a trailer. 100% think that, because they've shown footage already at D23 and other things. I think that's more likely than anything. Now, the hope there, here's my wish list, is that the trailer gets released to everybody, that it's a big thing across the globe, so that the folks at home like me will be able to watch it and dissect it and follow along with everybody here. So that's top of the wish list there. I don't think that there'll be any new Andor footage, because Andor comes out like 2 days later. So why release something like that? So I think for a wish list for those that are there is that you guys get to experience Andor together. I had so much fun in 2022 watching the first 2 episodes of Kenobi with everybody in that Anaheim Convention Center space. And if you get to do that for maybe the first 3 episodes of Andor that evening, I think that'd be a wonderful treat for everybody. So that's a wish list for folks that uh, are there. Now, Ahsoka, I think, because we don't know what season 2 will really involve yet for terms of story, I think that'll be really awesome to get updates about that. I think confirmation about the Ray Stevenson recasting would be I think that'd be an excellent place to do so, and to honor his work that he did in the first season of Ahsoka. That'd be excellent. I think if they want to bring out Hayden and perhaps full wish list for an announcement there, I think that'd be great for them to say, like, okay, we're doing some more Clone Wars flashbacks. We enjoyed that so much. We're going to do Hayden de-aged as well as Ewan de-aged as well, and then to showcase some more live action Clone Wars stuff for Ahsoka season 2 would be awesome. And more Force Ghost stuff too. I think just having that conversation literally would be great for the show, but also for I think for the story of Star Wars as well. Lastly, I want to touch upon Visions Volume 3. I want to, my wish list for that is that they announce that there are some sequels to stuff in Visions Volume 1. That would be awesome as well. And I would love to see some of those stories continue, particularly like the duel. That first episode from Visions Volume 1 would be so cool to see continued in some way, shape, or form. Now, those are what's the big panels and all that stuff. I wish they would have an announcement for a new animation project, not Visions purely, but like something in the Star Wars galaxy, a la like the Bad Batch, or a continuation of that. I know we were teased a little bit with that at D23, and that didn't happen. So that would be nice to have that, some more clarity perhaps around the upcoming TV slate beyond Ahsoka and Andor would be awesome. Like, is Skeleton Crew getting a second season? Unfortunately, just without like a showcase panel, I don't think that these are going to be the focus for the convention over the weekend there. So I think they're really just looking ahead at these upcoming projects and giving us their all on them, and that's going to be the dominating story and narrative of the convention. So I'm not expecting a whole lot, to be honest. I think it's just gonna be fun to celebrate Star Wars again. It's been a while since London and even D23, so it'll be wonderful for folks to just get together. And I think a little bit on my wish list too is that they live stream it. I think that would be excellent and great for the folks of us here at home too. Maybe they do it on a delay so that I don't have to be up at all hours of the evening. But who knows how it goes? I'll be doing something CouchCon wise, and we'll be doing a lot of fun stuff for the folks here at home, and reporting on all the news that's come out as it comes out over there as well. I bet you there'll be some High Republic panels. Maybe there's some park stuff over there too, and a lot of interviews with cast and crew as they are about. So, folks, that is all of the questions and news that I have for this week's episode of the podcast. Again, if you want to continue the conversation with us, we can be found on Twitter or X, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky. Just search for Force Ghost Conversations, and we'd love to continue the conversation with you on those platforms. Again, if you want to support the show in other ways too, we got a TeePublic store. If you want to wear Force Ghost Conversations merchandise and show your pride across the galaxy, you can find it. Our TeePublic store site is in the link of this episode description. And also our Patreon site. If you want to ask questions like Daz did on the show, and also get access to a lot of different other goodies for the podcast, you can find that in our Patreon site, of course, too. Again, link in the episode description here. So, folks, that is all this segment has to offer. We'll be back on the other side of this very short break here with our conversation celebrating Kathleen Kennedy with Greg and Jen. Stay tuned, folks. Welcome back to another installment of Force Ghost Conversations, everyone. I am thrilled to celebrate the wonderful Kathleen Kennedy in today's episode. As you may have heard, this is a person that's been in the news lately, whether she may or may not be retiring, but it sounds like she's staying around at least for the near future. And we've got a great panel of people here to celebrate her accomplishments at Lucasfilm and just have a really candid conversation about her and the last 13 years that she's had at Lucasfilm. Holy cow, hard to believe that's been a thing. But like I said, we do have a panel, and let me introduce them. So let's start with returning guest, Greg Cass, who you know as EyeOnCanon Online, the Long Take Review podcast, and a slew of other things on the internet as well. Greg, welcome back to the show, and how are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm particularly excited about this topic. Listeners of the Rebel Base Card know I snuck in like a rant when we did a new show related to this. So glad to have more space to rant online even more.
Agreed. I did enjoy that rant, and particularly that might be why you've been asked to add more thoughts to this conversation here. So thank you in advance for bringing those to the table here. But we also have a new guest to Force Ghost Conversations. You know this. If you've listened to Greg's other podcast, Long Take Review, you may know this person. Some in other circles we may call this person Greg's boss. So we have welcome to the show for the first time, Jen Sopchockchai Bankard. Jen, how are you doing? And welcome to Force Ghost Conversations. You're also from the Long Take Review podcast too, so I wanted to make sure I got that in there before introducing you.
Thank you. Yes, no, so happy to be here. And it is really surreal being on a podcast with Greg and not Greg McLaughlin and talking about something Star Wars related. There's we almost have all the pieces that I'm used to. So I'm really happy to be here. Long time listener, first time guest. Very excited.
Well, thrilled to have you. And yes, the Venn diagram is almost complete. Greg McLaughlin is always with us though in spirit. So, just pull out a Star Wars card that we have somewhere around us, and he's with you.
Oh, I have to tell you, Anthony, because this is relevant to one of your guest spots on Greg's show.
Ooh.
Hudson Hawk is playing at a local movie theater this weekend in the Boston area, and Greg almost flew up for it. Like, I think he was like so close. Like, I'll come up and we can watch it.
Yeah, are you going, Greg?
It would be fun. I can't make the times work, or else I would be there. But it'll still be a mystery. Whatever Hudson Hawk is.
Are you sure you
can't
make
it
work?
Bruce Willis festival. So.
Bruce Willis festival. You're burying the lead here.
Wow, that's not so fun.
What else is on this Bruce Willis shebang?
Fifth Element, Sixth Sense, like 5 other movies I'd never heard of. Like it's a big celebration of his career. I'm not exactly sure why they picked. I mean, I know he's been in the news a little bit. Yeah. But he's had some health troubles, but they're doing a big celebration here. So tempting. A friend is going to Sixth Sense with his teenager because he realized his teenager's young enough that they don't know the twist, right? Like discovering somebody young enough to have not missed or to have missed all those spoilers is fun.
Wow, it's like the rare person that you could find that doesn't know anything about Star Wars that you can really get the reveal with them for. Like, oh wow, someone that doesn't know the spoiler alert I see dead people moment from The Sixth Sense would be a unique experience again. Wow. Jen, when is the Hudson Hawk episode of the Long Take Review coming?
I mean, I think we're now boxed into scheduling that at some point. So Greg, get yourself to that screening. And do some live solo pod
on the
recording.
Spot.
Yeah. So cool. Well, thank you both so much for coming here to celebrate the president of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy. And Jen, since you're first time guest on the show, I want to start with you with this first question here. How did you first become aware of Kathleen Kennedy? Was it perhaps the announcement of her succeeding George Lucas when the purchase of Lucasfilm by Disney was announced back in 2012? Or did you perhaps know her from her many popular films that she produced starting in the 80s?
So like a lot of us, I did I think I had never seen her face, probably, or didn't recognize her face until she was announced as Lucas's successor. But then it didn't take me very long when I looked her up to be like, whoa, like she's done all of these other films.
Yeah.
And then I think a really joyful viewing experience for me was watching the Light and Magic docuseries on Disney Plus, because she's in that. And so I think it's been a joy learning about kind of how legendary she really is. I think producers often don't have a lot of limelight on them unless you are suddenly in charge of Star Wars.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, one day you're in the background running, like whatever a producer needs to do in order to get the job done, and then the next day George Lucas is like, "Hey, you want to meet for lunch? And I'll ask you if you want to, lead this Lucasfilm thing that I've been operating here." I mean, it's crazy. Like her stardom just went from nothing to everything overnight, and now people get to go back and see like, oh, I have 40 years plus worth of work that is really incredible, and like. She may be, I don't know if, I hope someone can like do the tallying of math, but like if you were to account all the films and box office that she's accumulated over the years, with inflation included, of course, she might be one of the most like successfully box office persons in the world. Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there aren't many names. If you asked a random person on the street, name 3 movie producers, it's probably her, Kevin Feige, and then they'd be like, like, so yeah, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, they'd say Frank Marshall, her husband, would be the other Kennedy Marshall. Greg, over to you now. Where did you first learn about Kathleen Kennedy, and tell us your experience with this?
Just now. Who is Kathleen Kennedy? Sounds cool. No, I think I was probably much in the same boat. I do remember. So for a long time, you just mentioned her husband, Frank Marshall, and for a long time, when I saw Frank Marshall's name on things, I actually in my head would picture Gary Marshall. And they have similar roles in some ways. So I think for a long time, I just confused those two men. But I, when I became aware of her, I think again at the secession moment, and was kind of shocked to see like, oh, she's been around a really long time, and then eventually learned that she started as kind of an assistant to Spielberg and proved herself and really rose through the ranks. It is kind of an incredible like look through her IMDb page, where you're like, oh, basically everything I love. Okay, she's been involved in, not always in control of the whole like set of films. Sometimes she pops into a franchise and back out, but certainly with her partnership with Spielberg. And I will say, there are behind the scene pictures from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom where you see like a really young Kathleen Kennedy, and you're like, oh wow, like it's just incredible to see that she's been there and been a part of it. But I think in that moment when she took over, it also became like this, I think Disney and Lucasfilm were trying to figure out what does Star Wars look like without George, and kind of rose her to a level of prominence. We've talked before, Anthony, when I've guested about that famous investors call where she really came out and did like a full presentation. And that's a role I could never see Lucas doing, right? He would come introduce a certain project, but when it was the prequels, it was a lot of Rick McCallum, not a lot of George. So I think that kind of this moment she became, the head of Lucasfilm and kind of in the model of Kevin Feige was kind of made a prominent figurehead was really interesting. I also still find it very confusing that she has a twin sister. So like you see them together at, red carpet events. I listened to the Scrubs podcast for a long time, and Donald Faison has a very funny story where he goes up and like gushes to Kathleen Kennedy about how great she is. And it's her sister the whole time. It's a very funny anecdote that people should track down.
Oh man, gonna need to find that one. I didn't even know she had a twin.
Oh yes, she would both would be at a lot of the sequel trilogy red carpets, and they are very, very much identical twins.
That's crazy. I mean, I used to watch those live streams religiously of the red carpets for those, and never once did I come across this illustrious twin. Amazing.
They need to remake The Parent Trap.
I think so.
They swap.
I will
see how long it takes before anyone notices.
Absolutely. And kudos to Kathleen Kennedy. I mean, she's 71 now. And like I was watching a ton of videos in prep for this, particularly like the 2012 like roundtable she did with Lucas, and some of her interviews throughout the years that she did on whether it be the Celebration live stage or with the former Star Wars show on YouTube. And wow, she hasn't really seemingly aged at all in like 13 years, and watched some like Indiana Jones behind the scenes and Warhorse behind the scenes clips, and she also hasn't really aged since then too. So kudos to Kathleen Kennedy for reversing time. So I will say, for me to answer this question, I and just for the understanding of Anthony as a person, I will say that I became what you both would call like a cinephile around 2005 or so. And this was particularly with the 2005 going into 2006 Oscar race, where I became obsessed with the film Munich. Also, War of the Worlds came out that year, so a Steven Spielberg twofer. And once that got nominated for Best Picture, I was enthralled and wanted to watch that ceremony. And it was the first time that I'd watched the Academy Awards. And when they announced Steven Spielberg anytime, I saw Kathleen Kennedy sitting right beside him there in that ceremony. And then that led me to go to Google and to search who is lady sitting beside Steven Spielberg at ceremony. And that's how I thought it might be his wife at first, and turned out no, that's his producer. His wife was Kate Capshaw. So that's where I kind of discovered, oh, this is Kathleen Kennedy, and then look at the various films that she'd worked on. I'm like, oh, she's worked on a lot of stuff again that I had been interested in up to this point. It's interesting again that I was able to watch Munich as a 10-year-old, and Indiana Jones I was told not to watch. I was not allowed to watch those films, and E.T. and all these other incredible films I had to discover later in my 20s because of parents. Right? It makes total sense. Total sense here. So that's where I started with this one. But we've all kind of talked a little bit here that Kathleen Kennedy has, this Hall of Fame quote unquote career before even joining Lucasfilm in 2012 full time. So what would you say is your favorite project of hers prior to The Force Awakens in 2015? Greg, let's start with you on this one. What's the home run for you on this one?
Well, this is the classic Anthony impossible question, right? Because again, you look at the IMDb page and it's like, oh, which of my absolute
what's your favorite John Williams track?
Yeah, exactly right. So it is tough, but I have to go with, when I think of like across my life, there are like 10 of these movies that have meant the world to me. But one I don't get to talk a lot about, that was actually before I was a Star Wars fan, before I was an Indiana Jones fan, I was a giant fan of Back to the Future. And so, remembering that she's a part of that kind of moment as well in that franchise, which again is a Spielberg production but not a Spielberg film, and she was a producer on all three of the Back to the Future films, and those hold such a dear place in my heart. And I really love that they haven't been franchised to death. I know there's a musical out there. I haven't seen it. I've heard
pretty
fine
good
things.
Yeah.
So I love that it's kind of still safe, right? Like, we all, clearly the three of us are giant Star Wars fans, and we wouldn't trade the last 20 years for anything, or the last 10 years, I guess, since Force Awakens popped up. Well, 20, it depends where your line is. But right. It really does feel like, Back to the Future is just like this special thing. And I will say, my son is 9, and last summer he went and spent a week with grandparents, and they showed him Back to the Future without me. And I was so mad. I was like, I wanted to show him that. Like, why would I have ever brought it up? But I was so angry. And I have said it so many times out loud. They recently had him for a weekend, and they wanted to show him Jurassic Park. And he said, no, I can't watch another movie without Dad. Like, Dad wants to show me Jurassic Park. So, but Back to the Future is just always makes me smile. It's one of those, I had the video cassette, and then the DVD, and then the Blu-ray, and kind of wore each of them out, and still to this day can watch it and realize a connection I didn't see before, or something special. So I'm going with Back to the Future, even though it's tough competition.
Tough competition indeed, but that's a good one. And well, first I have to ask a follow-up here. Did your son like Back to the Future?
He loved it. And I had socked away in a box I bought when Mattel did it, like 20, 25 years ago, they did a one full-size hoverboard replica, and I busted that out, and I got to win the day because he could slide around the living room on that. He was a little upset it didn't actually float, but he loves Back to the Future. We've watched it a few times since.
That's
and
awesome.
I have gotten to show him Indiana Jones now, and I've gotten to show him, I'm going to show him Jurassic Park. That was part of our last discussion about Gareth Edwards, I think. So we'll get there. He's saving them all for me, where I'll recover, but
man, I just wish that we could have had like a recording of like the ire of Greg in that moment when you found out. I was getting mad on your behalf. Jen, I throw this impossible question to you now. What is your favorite pre-2015 Kathleen Kennedy production?
Yeah, and here I was thinking I was really smart for not going with Indiana Jones because I assumed Greg would pick that. So now I'm like rethinking everything. But when I looked at this list, and this filmography is so impressive and has so many touchstones in terms of my formation as a film fan. But I'm a kid of the 90s at the end of the day, and so there's kind of this run of Hook, Jurassic Park, and Twister. That I'm like, that's me. That's where it all started happening. Jurassic Park is probably my dad's favorite movie. And the more I think about it, especially on the Long Take Review, the more we kind of share our own sort of personal movie fan histories. I'm often reminded that my family is largely responsible for my love of movies, but mostly big blockbusters. And I think this was one of the first huge movies. It was the first movie I saw that got me to go read the books. And as a kid, and I can't do math on the spot now, but I wasn't really probably old enough to really be reading Michael Crichton. and yet there I was doing it. And it's about dinosaurs, Mom.
It's the worst that could happen.
And was not traumatized at all. But yeah, so that's and Hook is like, critically speaking, probably one of the weaker movies that I could have chosen. But I have such fond memories of Robin Williams' performance in that movie, and Rufio, right? Like, and it was just, again, it caught me at the right time to kind of spark my imagination. And that was really kind of my entry into Amblin movies, I think, too. So
I love it. I love when people say The Hook is one of their, because it's also one of my, and even though Spielberg is like, I don't really care for it. I love those films that like Temple of Doom where they're very honest. They're like, it wasn't my favorite. But I'm glad that there's an audience for Hook. And again, Jurassic Park is like the cream of the crop when it comes to that. I'm glad Twister's got to mention too. Another great one. It's funny, like Kathleen Kennedy has, and this according to IMDB, has 103 producing credits, so maybe plus or minus a few of those in case they got those wrong a little bit, with 15 upcoming. So this woman is not slowing down anytime soon when it comes to stuff. Now, of course, being a part of Lucasfilm really helps move that forward a bit, but she's still producing stuff on the side with the Kennedy Marshall group. And I was at the gym last night, and they always play a movie on like their big screen that they have, and they had Signs playing, and the film always repeats. It just constantly plays throughout the day. And when I went on the Stairmaster for a little bit towards the end, the film was repeating over again. And there at the beginning, Kennedy Marshall production, executive producer Kathleen Kennedy. I'm like, I can't escape this lady. She's everywhere. Not that I want to, but like, man, this is great.
My version of that is just yesterday I was watching Ponyo with my kids, and she's a producer on the U.S. version of that. And I think the other one is The Secret Life of Arrietty. And I was like, those sort of Disney-driven U.S. adaptations are really what break the common wisdom of like, you want sub, not dub, for those movies. And so, yeah, that was my moment where she did this too. What?
she's in everything. I mean, just any of these films, people will be like, yeah, I'd add that and I'd be good for my life. Add that to the resume. I can retire. Things are okay. It's like John Williams, but she's like the John Williams of producing, right? She's gunning for that Lifetime Achievement Academy Award that's like in the bag as soon as she decides to slow down with her work. Like it's coming. Get ready for that speech one day. And for me, I will say that I would say just Jurassic Park as well for the love of the movie. But I think after seeing the great documentary Light and Magic, currently on Disney Plus, go watch it if you haven't, folks. You really get to see
season 2
coming. Announced today.
I learned that from you. I learned that from you today. Yeah.
I'm breaking news, everybody. Season 2 of Light and Magic coming April 18th on Disney Plus. So you get that, you get Celebration, you get Andor. That's a wild time.
Whew.
No sleep at end of April. Come on, folks. But yes, she in that documentary was basically the one kind of semi-responsible for pushing the CGI dinosaur revolution in that, by having just kind of overlooking her shoulder and seeing the work that they were doing down at ILM. So there's a tangible way to say, like, okay, she had an impact on this movie. But I also believe that for an ulterior reason, that the trust that she and not Lucas, but Spielberg had built over the 10 years plus that they had worked up to that point, allowed him to go film Schindler's List, arguably the most important film of the 20th century, 21st century, of all time, frankly. Allowed him to focus on that purely so that she could do post-production work, and with Lucas do all that kind of stuff to close up the incredible film that is Jurassic Park, but allowed us to get both of those transformative films in the same year. It's hard to argue against the work that she did on that one there. But she did become the president of Lucasfilm in 2012. And Kathleen Kennedy has led the company since then, managing the production of 6 films, numerous live action and animated television series, documentaries, publishing initiatives, merchandising opportunities, and Disney Parks expansion. Wow, that's a lot. And with that in mind, all right, Jen, another softball question here. How would you grade her time in office so far? Has she been, quote unquote, a good steward of the Star Wars brand, in your opinion?
I would say in general that she has. And the way I started thinking about answering this question was because it's the kind of question you have to think about how you're going to start answering the question before you actually come up with an answer. And I kind of thought of it as, okay, what do I grade a student who didn't knock it out of the park, but had a super hard assignment? Like, I knowingly designed a very challenging question for them to answer, right? And that's kind of how I think of Kathleen Kennedy, is that her tenure has had really high highs and some missteps, and I think she's gotten a lot of criticism over the years. But at the same time, when you put it in the context of all the changes and challenges that she's had to face in terms of and the task that she was given, I think she did a pretty good job. And it's kind of like I'm imagining someone less qualified than she in this role, and oh no, that sounds nightmarish, right?
It hurts to think about.
Yeah. So for grade level, I'm around a B+, because if I'm thinking of the student where I'm like, I see the greatness, I see what you're doing. You didn't always get it totally right, but I appreciate that you managed to produce this considering what the prompt was.
Hey, show your work sometimes and you get half credit. A nice 3.5 GPA is a good way to get through, and you're still respectable in your degree. Greg, throw this over to you now. Where's she fall in the grade system for you?
You're really asking us to get into our day job, probably a little too much, but no, I do.
Come on, Dr. Cass.
I similarly thought about this the way Jen did, and slightly different in that, every once in a while as a teacher, you get that student who something terrible happens in their personal life that just like derails them, and you kind of get the final product and you're like, this isn't quite A-level work, but you did a really good job considering what's going on. So it's very much in line with the way Jen was phrasing this. And you kind of try to curve it a little, and that is the B+ for me, right? The grade that makes nobody happy, right? Every complaint I've ever gotten is because they got a B+. But I think for me, when I look at her stewardship of the brand, I cannot say she made all the right choices. There are a few very big moments that I think we don't know the full story. Say, for example, of exactly what happened on Solo, but it just feels like it wasn't exactly the right outcomes. Like something feels off about all of that. And I think, as Jen was alluding to, I would say the majority of her time as the head of Lucasfilm has been during a very chaotic time in Hollywood.
Sure.
Going from the rise of streaming to the pandemic to the actors and writers strikes, like these are things that are really difficult as a producer to deal with. So I certainly agree that, it's not been an easy set of circumstances. But I do think she's done admirably well. One of the things I struggle with is the fact that we are sitting here in 2025, in our 6th year since we saw a Star Wars movie. And it seems like part of the job of running Lucasfilm has to be to get movies into theaters. And every time we get one of these wonderful screenings where they show us episodes of TV, I'm like, please show me a movie. Like I want to experience that. And so I think that's where I kind of can't go to the A level, because we should have had a little more theater time. But I struggle to know, any of us can't really know. Is that her? Is that Disney? Is that circumstances and all those things? So it's hard because I'm already seeing the thumbnails with laser eyes and so on. But like, I can't quite get her to the A level for those reasons, despite some incredible, as Jen said, high highs.
Well,
what
I'm
about
glad
you, Anthony?
You've already
I want to hear you, Grady.
You've already noted what our thumbnail for this episode is going to be. So I will say I did a little bit of math before jumping on today, and I counted. Well, at that point, I had 18 negative things that have happened during the last 13 years. Some I would say in our control, some out of our control, like COVID delays, actors getting hurt, right? The infamous Harrison Ford 2015 plane crash is another, right? The things that you don't really have the ability like to handle, but like some of the negative press surrounding like, Colin Trevorrow on episode 9 and having to replace him, the whole Solo thing. The low box office on like an Indiana Jones 5, right? I feel like she bears some responsibility to that one, but also like things that she could have never foreseen, probably like racist backlash to Kenobi, the whole Acolyte and a saga. Let's call it a saga, because it felt like a saga as a person defending the show. The Josh Trank Boba Fett thing, like that whole thing that almost happened. And I had 18, and then Greg just reminded me of a 19th one in the strike. I didn't even. How could I forget? It was last year, and just totally uprailed the whole industry for a bit. I think with all of that, and the fact that they've, I think of what was life like when George Lucas was still running Star Wars. So pre-announcement 2012, all we had to look forward to was perhaps another season of Clone Wars and Robot Chicken and Family Guy episodes featuring Star Wars, right? There was not a whole lot with the IP totally moving forward. There was no real direction. You got a book here and there, and that was the big panel. It's like a celebration. You chat about the book or the new season of Clone Wars, and that was kind of it. But this injected a whole like a bit of adrenaline into the story of Star Wars, and just gave it a whole new life in a way that I never could have imagined post Revenge of the Sith. Now we're celebrating that 20th anniversary and just a few weeks here. But to think that we have had a new trilogy of films, the whole parks expansions, the Disney Plus explosion, plus they took some risks and went into, did a whole Indy 5 with Harrison Ford in his early 80s. Willow got a whole series come back. Now, again, that's another thing we could chat. The erasure of that. That's an interesting one. So it definitely wasn't afraid to go into new places, try new things, to take the mandate from Disney and say, earn us back our $4 billion investment and then some, which she has done. She's met that metric. I think that's a key one there. She's, followed the mandate prescribed of give us Disney Plus content. Sure, here you go. Give us movies. Here you go. Now you can debate the quality and quantity of that situation, which I think is a really fair conversation to have. But given the things that have happened during her time and the output that she's been able to do and the relative quality, I will say, I think a B+ is a solid place to arrive at that, right? Did everything hit the Force Awakens level of box office at the end of the day? No, but did it need to? I don't think so either. Now, do I wish that Indy 5 had perhaps hit that $1 billion mark, and maybe we'd be looking at perhaps another installment of the Indy franchise. I don't know. I would love to have seen that, or perhaps maybe I would love to have gotten those 2 other Willow seasons that were definitely teased at the end of the end of that season 1. Maybe I'd love to be able to watch that last episode of that first season again. So given all that, I would say a B+ is where I land on that. But Jen, I throw this question back to you here. What do you think, if anything, could she have done differently during her tenure that would have maybe raised that B+ into an A- or even dare I say an A+?
So I did go back to the source material in terms of the reason that we're having this episode right now, in terms of the news that sort of broke. I went and read Matt Bellany's original Puck News article, and then the Deadline interview that was sort of kind of like Kathleen Kennedy's response to that. And the thing that really disillusioned me, as a side note, was I'm a big fan of Matt Bellany's podcast, The Town, and I enjoy listening to him a lot. And so to see that I didn't realize he's been like kind of gunning for Kathleen Kennedy's job for a long time, and I was like, oh, okay. And so this is a long way of kind of getting to my point where the thing that I really, that the insight that I discovered from going back and reading those two pieces, and actually I would add Matt Bellany's original piece that he linked in his own new piece announcing kind of his investigative reporting that he had heard that she was planning to step down. And it was from 2021, and it was right after they'd sort of taken back the Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron movie, the whole debacle of like, oh, they're doing it, oh, they're not doing it, they're doing it. Like they made a big point to like show her in a flight suit, right? Like, and then it's not happening.
What a day.
So yeah, his major complaint about her, from what I read and what I can understand, is that she keeps firing creators or starting projects, and then that never happened with these high profile film creators, and that's partly why we haven't gotten a movie in a long time, because that's just that process seems to have not been working out. If you go back to the Deadline interview that was kind of came after this whole rumors of her retiring came out, she specifically says that it's kind of been weird for her since taking this job, that normal things that do and do not happen, the ebb and flow of movie development and film and television production, of like sometimes things don't work out, is just that much more visible because it's Star Wars, and that people are kind of holding more scrutiny to it. And whereas if all the things that had been sort of failed projects or things that needed reshoots or brought in another Tony Gilroy to like rewrite this, you know what I mean? Like every instance of that, had it been its own standalone movie, not many people would have batted an eye. But because her kind of explanation is like, those are normal things that happen during film production. We start lots of things and only some of things actually make it to production. But because we're expecting everything to be connected and everything to be Star Wars and sort of moving the franchise forward constantly, that we are suddenly kind of holding that to a different standard, right? And so my kind of conclusion that I came to about what could she have done differently was just to not jump into that right away, and to just focus on one standalone Star Wars film. Because it seems to be part of the problem is they were kind of working out and workshopping what does it mean to have a Star Wars movie in this decade in real time with creators who had never really done Star Wars before. And so I think focusing on just let's get the process down for how do we do that? How do we expand the franchise while still maintaining integrity? Because I would guess, this is entirely speculation, but I would guess a lot of those failed projects were because she's trying to protect Star Wars, and she's trying to protect what Star Wars is and make sure the brand has integrity and that the lore is consistent and like all the things that Lucasfilm works so hard to maintain. And that, like, you know, again, I have no evidence to base this on, but at least some of those failed projects have to be over something like that, right? Where they're like, no, that's going too far. We can't do that. Or that's not Star Wars, right? We just don't get to hear about that, about that part of it. And so I think just like honing in on the process before worrying about another trilogy, before worrying about how the saga is going to continue, I think just getting that process down probably would have helped a lot. Again, we're operating on limited information, and we're assuming that Kathleen Kennedy is singularly responsible for every decision for every movie that has ever been made or not made. But So we're limited in kind of our assumption and the premise of this exercise, but yeah.
Yes, we assume she's the one that's like, nope, this isn't happening, and then just scratches tears the script in half and says, "You're out of here." And I think you're right. A more pure focus on one project at a time would have probably yielded more consistent results, and at least led to a formula. I think that would have give them the groundwork to springboard to perhaps more projects in the future. I think it was really the explosion of Disney Plus and for trying to determine what is a series, what is not. Do we expand a thing that's meant to be a movie to 8 episodes, 6 episodes? Is it 12 episodes, 15 episodes? Does Andor get 4 seasons, 5 seasons, or is it just 2 like all these things that are constantly in motion? And I think because it's right, because it's Star Wars, it's constantly held under this like different lens of a microscope of scrutiny, where and also social media too, where like if it's a big news item, if something happens in the Star Wars galaxy, this creator says I had trouble working with this creative on this project. There's reshoots on Rogue One. There's reshoots on every movie, right? I think the famed example that people talk about is like if we had media coverage at the same time that Jaws was being produced, right? That would have been like, oh, Jaws is sinking in water already. Box office going to be -20, and it would never be the box office smash and wonderful film that we know and love today, perhaps because of negative perception that would have been circulating about the film prior to that. So I think you're right. A more clear focus on what the objectives are and goals. And it seems like they're trying to do that now to some degree with Mando and Grogu, and that kind of being the main focus of things as they slow down from the Disney Plus explosion that has now come back into a manageable circus for all of us here. And literally taking a character that was popular from that and then saying, all right, this is how we're going to reintroduce ourselves back into the movie industry. We have some other films potentially coming out, but all these people are working at different spaces. James Mangold's coming off the Academy Awards season. We'll see if he wants to start working on that project. Taika Waititi's trying to write a script. He's got a great first act. I don't know. We'll see if he can write 2 more.
Sounds right. Sounds right.
Sounds about right indeed. Yeah. Greg, I turn this over to you now. What do you think that she could have done to maybe raise that B+ into that illustrious A? What can I do, Dr. Cass, to raise my grade?
Back when Rate My Professor was a thing, one of my first reviews said like, really great guy, supportive, but you have to work so hard to get an A in his class. And I was like, shut it down. I want that to be like the only review I ever get forever, because that's perfect. Like that's what I want to be known as. I think I liked Jen's answer a lot. Mine was the very related one idea I had that was very related is just announce things later, because I do think that's all part of the problem. And I can't necessarily blame her for that, because I do think there's been a new culture of stockholder meetings and stuff that you have to kind of convince investors there's so much coming that they should hold their stock and not sell. So I can't totally blame her for that. But I do think that if there are fans of good disposition that are critical of her, it's because of the broken promises of this. All these projects that they're probably I saw a recent breakdown that's still like and the Rian Johnson trilogy is still happening. He's just gonna finish Benoit Blanc first. I'm like
and Poker Face and everything else he's got planned.
I'm not sure I'm gonna hold my breath on that one, but more recently there was they announced a trilogy of films, and I found myself as a diehard Star Wars fan kind of reacting very flatly. I was like, I just don't have faith enough that this is a thing to get excited. And so that's part of it. So the other thing I will say, and again, this is only because in the exercise we're blaming her for everything bad and giving her credit for everything good. One of my frustrations with Lucasfilm over the last 13 years is that I feel like they are too responsive to fans. And I'm sorry, internet, but I just feel like they are very reactive whenever there's a backlash to something they create. And I think you just alluded to the saga of The Acolyte is very, very much that. You know, I loved when there was that, I didn't love the racist backlash, but I loved that Ewan McGregor was out that first day.
Yes.
Like, you're not a real Star Wars fan if you're doing that. And I like that kind of responsiveness. But, you know, my read on the sequel trilogy is that they tried something really innovative and different with episode 8. And then when they saw the backlash, they were like, sorry, we'll just put it all back in the box and do what you like. And it felt to me like a retreat. And you know, this is something that a lot of companies have had to learn over the last decade or so, which is the loudest voices aren't the majority online, and that the majority of fans don't actually know what they want, right? Like any of these films that end up being films or TV shows that kind of get done by committee of what the internet says they want are usually kind of the most bland, boring things. I mean, you know, as we look at the world of AI, that's essentially what it is, right? It's like we just went to the internet and we had the internet come up with in mass what the next word should be, and that's what some of these products are. So I would like to see Lucasfilm stop listening to fans. Actually, Matt Bellamy has done, there's like fan focus groups out there. He's done some of the reporting on that. I think that's all like dangerous. Like I would say, you know, trust your creatives, let them you know, follow their vision. Something like the High Republic has gotten fans incredibly energized, and yet nobody sat down and said, I want to hear about the high times of the Jedi, and I want talking plants that can eat people and so on. I guess they don't talk, but like, you know, it's like nobody asks for what those things are, and then we get them and it's like, yeah, this is so good and it's so wonderful. So I'd like to see Lucasfilm a little more in that space, and that would really pump it up to an A. Although I do also like Jen's point that for all we know, she's protecting the brand, right? And,
that's true.
And Solo feels like that too, right? Like I would love to say just trust the creatives, but it feels like maybe they got a little off track somewhere along the way and lost whatever Solo was going to be in the mix, and so she had to pull it back. So I think it is brand protection, even if it feels kind of raw sometimes.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is like, I can't wait for the book that's written 20 years from now that like looks back at this era, or the documentary or whatever it is that really gives us the lowdown.
Light Magic season 12. Like
drive us into the future, everybody. Tell us about the, you know, John Knoll, tell us all the behind the scenes details about everything in the Solo story, right? Solo, a Star Wars story, has multiple meanings. And yeah, what was Lord and Miller? What was Ron Howard? Did Kathleen Kennedy really hate how they wore socks and all that? I remember that whole thing back in the day. I mean, I'll eat that stuff up personally, but I do think that's right. She is protecting the brand to some degree. I think that's the point of, like, that was her mandate in some way when getting this position and knowing that Disney's like, yeah, make us money. We need to make money. That's the whole point. We bought you. We bought this property so that you can, you know, we didn't buy it for nothing. You know, $4 billion. We got to get this return on investment. We need to start turning things out for the future here. We got to make this happen. And yeah, it's just, it's a tough situation where you're facing all this, and we'll get into our next question here a little bit too, but all the challenges she's faced over these years, Solo being a big one of them, and there's many things within the Solo whole thing with itself too that is like, they weren't able to really market the film too well because Avengers Infinity War came out like 2 weeks before, and they couldn't even like have toys in the shelves of Target. So like because they had a rule with the Marvel brand to have them on the shelves for a little longer. So like some of these things, I feel like it was not a win-win. Maybe it should have been pushed to December, and she should have pushed for that further. I know Iger's kind of said as much in his tell-all biography that came out. But yeah, if I will say anything that I wish that would have been done more, I think, Greg, you said a little bit here too. is in protecting the actors and actresses more, especially when there's big backlash of things, whether it be racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever badism we want it to, whatever it's going to be, unfortunately. If just more protection, whether it be I know Amazon for Rings of Power has like a therapist on set to help with the actors and actresses as they're experiencing those troubles. Literally coming out and saying we don't support this type of behavior. I think the Ewan McGregor is a really great example. Maybe since he was a producer on the thing, he probably just said, I'm going to do this myself, and didn't even ask for permission. I bet there's a whole litany of lawyers that are probably saying don't do anything. We don't need more. If you don't acknowledge it, then it will cause more a strife, and it'll just go away on its own. But for the Acolyte, it just didn't seem to go away on its own. Every week it was a whole new thing, and just to see the actors having to protect themselves and going on Instagram and commenting on each other's posts, I mean, like, you're great, love you, you're wonderful. It was tough seeing that, and it felt really fatiguing, I would say, as a fan in support of this. And again, I'll agree with you too, Greg. No fan panels. No, none of that. None.
Yeah.
that will lead to. I remember this picture that came out of when it was like 2 months after Last Jedi, and it was like Luke Skywalker basically in. It was. I'm describing this horribly, but it was like a poster of what the people that were angry about The Last Jedi thought The Last Jedi should be. And it was like Luke Skywalker buff and basically his Power of the Force figure tearing down a Star Destroyer and just no women or anything on the poster at all. Like, oh, guys, come on now. So that arguably depends on who's the people in that quote unquote fan room that is creating this. And without, like, creators get a degree and they're brought in for a reason. Like, no one just gets the first job out of the gate that is Star Wars. They have to prove themselves in some other things for a little bit, and then they get the opportunity to play in the sandbox. Trust the creators. That's what they're there to do. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. Move on. There's 1,000 other things in the Star Wars galaxy to watch. Go check out Nubs, right? No fan panel would have created Nubs as the coolest character in the Star Wars galaxy. So this is something that we get to appreciate and enjoy because the creator was like, I think this would be cool. And then they tried it out, and then it released it to the world, and fans reacted to it in a positive way. But we've acknowledged some of the challenges, and I'm happy to list all 19 that I've thought of over the last 13 years here. But Jen, let's start with you here. What would you say has been the greatest challenge that Kathleen Kennedy has faced over this time?
I would say it's probably the advent of Disney Plus. And I say that as a heavy power user of Disney Plus. So this is definitely not to say that that anything against Disney Plus necessarily, but I do think that the timing of the handover and the like compiled on top of the Disney factor, and then also Disney's like, hey, streaming's where it's at, we got to really expand into that sector. I think that was just like a really poor timing in terms of like all this stuff is kind of coming down on the franchise at once. And because I think about, and I only know this off the top of my head because I had to look up when the Netflix Daredevil's show started, and so 2015 is when Force Awakens also comes out, right? And Marvel is a little bit ahead of Star Wars at that point, right? Because by then Winter Soldier had come out the year before, Ultron was coming out that year, right? So it's like it's the goal. You could argue like the golden age of Marvel leading up to kind of it's like we're the juggernaut of Hollywood right now, with Endgame. And if you think about Star Wars just trying to get started, like kind of in a new era around that time, the pressure to produce a brand new genre that is somehow neither a movie nor a TV show, right, through Disney Plus is a huge challenge, and something, again, like I mentioned earlier, they had to kind of figure out how to do it in real time. And I would say that at this point, they haven't quite figured it out in terms of what pacing works and what budget wise works, right? Because I think a big problem with the Acolyte was if it had been made at a normal TV show budget, that it would have gotten a second season, even if a lot of people didn't really think this first season worked. But because the budget was so high, they're like, they have to write it off as like, we can't do this again because it was not successful enough to justify the amount of money we spent on it. And so like having these Disney Plus series where the budget is like a film because they want the high budget cinematic kind of experience, but at home on Disney Plus, but at the same time, the storytelling is kind of this liminal space where it's like we don't quite have enough episodes for it to be a full season of television and episodic storytelling that builds over time, but at the same time we it's too long to be a movie that we wouldn't put it in theaters, right? Like so I think that has been the biggest challenge, is having to both expand the franchise in a huge way and kind of find its footing in a whole new medium. I'd say has been the biggest challenge.
I'm gonna yes and you there, because that's a great example of like the here this is, figure it out, was basically what it felt like was the mandate at that point in time. And as a fan trying to like I want this to succeed, but I don't know how success is really measured on Disney Plus. And this goes for a lot of the streaming sites. I don't know if it's like 1,000 tweets in support positively for something. Is it I watch it 4 times on different devices over the course of the week? Is it minutes? Like, how does this? I don't know how those shows really make money beyond advertisements and let's say like the subscriptions, of course. And I'm not necessarily sure how they tie that to like, oh, it's because The Acolyte came out and people are watching it, and that's how all this ad revenue and everything was generated because of that. I'm not really sure how the streaming wars work in terms of creating profit, and that's a thing that I wish that I knew. I wish I would have known how I could be more of a support for the things that I enjoy, rather than just like, we talk about it weekly if there's a show coming out, or I'm generally fairly positive about things online, like, Light and Magic Season 2 is coming out April 18th, folks. If you haven't heard the news, spread it now. But it's been a thing, right? The whole streaming thing's been a blessing and a curse in some way, right? We had that wild time where Bad Batch and what was it, Andor or Mando Season 3 overlapped, and also Willow overlapped with that too at one point, and they were like, I don't know, can we have 2 shows at the same time? We'll release one on Friday, we'll release one on Wednesday. Now we're releasing some shows at Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern time. There's no really consistency when it comes to this. I feel like would have also been a big help from the start if they had just hopefully they just stuck to like the Friday at 3 a.m. Eastern time like they used to do it, and then decided that isn't working, we'll go to Wednesday, and then that didn't work, and it's all changing up again. So yeah, it's a tough one, and I think there's, like you said, they're still figuring it out. Perhaps the only one that's really been super successful in that regard, I think, in terms of figuring out length and time, has really been Andor. And maybe that's just because of Gilroy's experience in working with the television medium and such over the years. But obviously, I think you can also say too, The Mandalorian, like they launched Disney Plus with that, and now it's leading them back into the cinemas. So now that's been some of their biggest wins, arguably over that time frame. But you do have the losses of Acolyte and Willow. Book of Boba Fett didn't probably work as well as they wanted it to. Obi-Wan Kenobi probably should have been a movie. The figuring of that out was it's been an interesting 5 years, because we just celebrated that anniversary too. Crazy to think. Greg, you were on that show, and do you have any further thoughts about the greatest challenges or challenge, in your opinion, that Kathleen Kennedy has faced over these 13 years?
Well, I will just join the choir on that specific regard, and just note that we've seen the damage of this moment and trying to figure it out on the other Disney brands, right? Marvel is really struggling, and people now are seeing Marvel films as inessential or they're too far behind because they missed some seasons of television. And then Pixar is kind of really hurting because they kind of got the audience trained on, I'll just wait till it appears on Disney Plus instead of going to the theater. And Pixar's doing pretty well on like Inside Out 2, but their original content in recent years hasn't, there's mixed reporting, because like Elemental had a terrible opening, but actually kind of legged it out and did very well eventually in its total box office. But
but
you
like
know,
Soul
even
and Turning Red, and they did a re-release of those, and they
yeah,
made like $20.
yeah, yeah. And you know, you know, the pandemic is mixed into all that conversation as well, because changing the days also was like, well, we don't have any movies coming out on Friday night, but then oh shoot, we need people to go to the movies Friday night, so we have to move it to a different night. So well, even, you know, setting aside Jen's specific answer, which was very good on streaming, I actually just said kind of the mandates from Disney as the biggest challenge, because when you compare Kathleen Kennedy to George was 100% in control. He could do whatever he wanted. By the time he finishes Jedi, he's kind of financially independent and can make demands of the studios to release his films. You know, there was just even new reporting this week, which was like, you know, he wanted to make Star Wars Underworld, and he has 60 scripts that he just paid a ton of money for that are just sitting somewhere. I'm sure they weren't
along
thrown
with
away,
those
but I'm
7,
sure
8, 9 scripts too.
Well, and when you were talking about what we had to hope for, you erased Star Wars Detours, which I
how could I
believe
forget?
there's like
I've
40
seen the
episodes
vid-
of that like created, and it's just it
Probably
we'll
for the
probably never
best.
see the light of day.
That was I've seen some of the stock
probably.
footage. Yeah.
So I think the fact that Kathleen had to not just be the head of a studio, but then had to be the intermediary between a large corporation with a lot of demands. You know, I think in terms of the figuring it out, just the fact that the sequel trilogy had to get out that fast every other year is a pace we'd never seen before. I think a lot of the struggles around some of those films are because of the pacing and trying to get it out and hit those dates while still having the kind of, as you rightfully said, Anthony, the behind the scenes that's completely normal. But if you have to hit that December deadline, then you're kind of in trouble. So so all of that plus streaming, I think, as Disney has tried to figure out who it is in this modern era of reduced box office and streaming and all these other factors we're talking about, just having to answer to them. You know, in one thing, Kathleen at one point announced that Lucasfilm was going to produce an adaptation of a book, Children of
Blood and Bone.
Blood and Bone. Oh, there it is.
From that crazy Investors Day conversation.
Yeah. And so like that shows me that at that time she kind of thought, oh, I can still do my normal producing thing while being at Lucasfilm, and that's faded away. I think that is now in the hands of some other studio. So
yeah, they lost the rights to it.
It's a question. Yeah. So it's like, I think trying to figure out how Lucasfilm is a part of the Disney Corporation is tricky, and there have been successes and failures, but I think that's a much different challenge than what George faced.
Absolutely right. And that's a great question. Is Lucasfilm just Star Wars? I was excited when they announced that Children of Blood and Bone, because I thought, great, this is another IP to add to the Lucasfilm repertoire, if you will, right? And the fact that they tried to do a Willow thing, they tried to add another indie to the canon. Lucasfilm didn't have to always be Star Wars. Maybe there's another American Graffiti out there too. Who knows? Or THX 1139. Come on, guys. Got a whole other sequel coming.
Every time you've mentioned Indy 5, I look to Jen being like, come on, where's my sound?
She's not I've been playing it mentally. James Mangold, Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny.
Yeah, what am I without my soundboard? I don't know.
I just really, I'm looking for a way to throw in The Brutalist into this conversation somehow, just so I can mentally throw in that overture as well into this conversation.
And I did shorten it enough that we did not get flagged by YouTube for copyright infringement, so I figured it out.
That's brilliant.
You can't just put too much.
But
to follow up on something you said, I think with Star Wars specifically, the thing we have to keep in mind transitioning from George Lucas to Kathleen Kennedy, Star Wars went from an independent study to a group project.
Yes,
right. Not to take it back to grading and kind of how we can fairly grade somebody, but I think this big question of, okay, if we now suddenly have multiple iterations, multiple Star Wars stories going on at the same time by different creators, and we want those creators to feel like they have some kind of creative agency, right, and that they can put their unique stamp on it, I think it's kind of puts us in an impossible bind where it's like, well, do we want like the spaghetti western version of Star Wars, the samurai version of Star Wars, the legal procedural version of Star Wars. Like, do we want all these different flavors, or is it? And how do we do if the answer is yes, then how do we do that but still make it all feel cohesive? And I think that's the newest challenge, right? Is like how to strike that balance.
Yeah. And while also like releasing all that at the same time, plus books and comics that are also, and just like trying not to oversaturate, I guess, in a way, the audience that is going to be eating this up every week. I think even to something like the High Republic, which I've been ardently a supporter of from the beginning, it felt like, I had a big pile of books on my shelf for a while. And then now that you get through all of it, then it's like, okay, now I have nothing for a little bit here, which kind of is a nice reprieve, but also like I'm waiting for the next one. So it's weird to strike that balance all around the board when it comes to that. And that's an excellent point about the brand thing. For another challenge that I'll just add to the mix here, which I don't think we've hinted at here yet, but it's like the overall cloud of Lucas that still hangs over Kathleen Kennedy. Like, she's still being compared to George, and frankly, George has had a renaissance in retirement in many ways, but over the last like 7 years, I will say, a subset of the fandom that hated George ardently and was basically telling him to retire, and that's why he retired and said, I don't want to do this anymore, has now come back into a favor of Lucas and all things Lucasian and the prequels, and just they've really come to respect that in a way to knock Kathleen Kennedy down. We'll get into that conversation in a little bit here, but just the George of everything always being compared everything to what would George do, how would George handle this, that's got to be a lot of pressure on a person. Even the terrible comments he made after The Force Awakens, probably out of spite and grumpiness, of course, I would imagine, calling Disney the white slavers when it comes to the handling of The Force Awakens. And because I watched that roundtable where he seemed very proud that he handed off his spec scripts for 7, 8, and 9, and the fact that he didn't really use those to a large degree, or at least the ideas within them, really upset this man. And then he went to go eat spaghetti at a food court probably, and watch some films and try and get his museum built one day. But yeah, I gotta imagine like having that cloud overhead, and with him still being active, and he comes to all of the premieres for things, but he still looks grumpy when he's there. And there's always like the fabled like take a picture of George Lucas looking grumpy on set or on the red carpet. Does he? And then that leads to a bunch of YouTube videos. George Lucas hates episode 9 or hates episode 8. In reality, we don't really know what he thinks about those things. He probably is like, okay, you guys had fun, go ahead. I gotta imagine that's tough. It's like when like your boss gets promoted or something like that, and you take over their job, but yet they still kind of like micromanage you a little bit from the side, and are always like overlooking your shoulder about things, and you never really get like the full chance to spread your wings and do stuff without a little bit of scrutiny from that regard. I gotta imagine that was tough for Kathleen over the years.
Well said. I mean, I think that's exactly right. And I think it's not even really George's fault. And you didn't blame George there, right? But it's just, we haven't experienced that a lot when a franchise is created so much by one solo creator and they are still around, right? They tend to die, not wishing any ill fate to George Lucas, but they tend to die and somebody picks up the end. One of my other internet projects is Wheel of Time. And, Robert Jordan passed away before he got to the end of those books. And Brandon Sanderson, who's now very much more famous on his own, took him over and kind of finished it out. So it is like interesting to have that person still around. And I think your boss analogy is exactly right. Hit a little too close to home, but is exactly right.
We know, we all knew what I was talking about there. It's tough. It's tough. So adversely, let's talk about some of the good things that have happened over these last 13 years, because there's a lot of exciting and good stuff, I think. What do you think is the crowning achievement so far of Kathleen Kennedy's tenure as the president of Lucasfilm. Greg, we'll start with you on this one. Tell us the best thing that she's done, or your favorite thing.
I have like a short list of like 5, because I do think you're right to note that
hand it over. We'll take it. She needs the love. Let's do it.
Well, I will say that it is not my favorite Star Wars, but I think you can't look at her tenure and not say Mandalorian is a huge achievement. So I'm going to mention that as an honorable mention, and it's really because it's not my favorite Star Wars, but it's a huge achievement that you took it to a different medium, as Jen was saying. You took it to a different format, and yet like people who hadn't thought about Star Wars ever, or at least in 40 years, suddenly were buying 10 Baby Yoda dolls. And I remember a specific walk I made around Kohl's and the department store. Hey, there he is. And every department in Kohl's had something Baby Yoda at the time. I mean, Grogu now, but it was like clothing for every age group, like travel mugs and shoes and like every sheets and it was just incredible. But I'm gonna go, and I fear I might be taking Jen's answer to this. I'm gonna go Galaxy's Edge, because I think, again, I think it's part of a larger team. But if we're giving her credit for everything,
why not?
I think Galaxy's Edge is absolutely incredible, and is literally set into stone in so many ways that I think there's no way that will ever be undone inside those parks. I mean, I think they're looking at making changes, and they're always adding in the way Disney always does. But it is so remarkable when I get somebody from outside my Star Wars life, in my normie life, who goes there and they're like, hey, you like Star Wars, right? Have you seen what they created? And I
pretty cool.
I specifically had a cousin who's, kind of the complete opposite of me in every way. And he's like, hey, nerd, I'm with my family in Star Wars. And it's incredible. And this was like 2 years before I got to go. So I was like, oh, come on, this is not fair. But, I know you have the good fortune of being relatively local. So I'm jealous. You're both. Yeah. Who am I talking to? One on each of the Batus. So I've only gotten to go once. And I really, before my trip, I was like, this is a one and done. I'm going to do everything once. I got a few things right in here. I'm going to do everything once. We did the lightsaber. We did the droid. We did it all. And from the second I got home, all I thought about was going back. And I'm still plotting and like desperate to go. And it's like, I went with my son and my dad, and my dad is not a Star Wars fan. And so he like couldn't believe how I just wanted to like sit around there for like hours. And like we went on Monday of our trip, and then we did Epcot on Tuesday. I'm like, but we should probably go back in the evening and go. And we did. I ended up, I think each of our, at least 3 of the 4 days of our multi-pass, we were there just enjoying it. He didn't understand it. He's like, why are you going on this Rise of the Resistance ride again? I'm like, this is the most incredible experience of my life. It's not
a ride. Yeah. It's episode 8.5.
So I think that is just something that never would have quite happened under George. And without Disney, obviously. Star Tours being a wonderful, beloved first step towards this, but it's something so big and special. And it'll always be that special. I look forward to going back many times in my life.
Great. Greg, did you have any more? I wanted to make sure. I only counted 2, and I thought you said you had 5. So I want to make sure that you got all of them.
I mean, sequel trilogy, you don't make 7, 8, and 9 and pretend those don't happen. Like that is incredible. And that's now a full third of this, and characters that are as beloved now as any of the others. And I just watched the Tony Gilroy live stream this afternoon. And I'm like, Andor's the greatest thing in the world. Like nothing else matters. Andor,
Mel
and like
Mel She.
The idea that you could, I have a blog post I'm probably going to write about this, but like there was always a call for Star Wars for adults, and that for a long time meant like R-rated, like Star Killer, Death Troopers stuff. But this is Star Wars for adults, and it is incredible. And so I would list any of those in her. So I think that's 4, but that'll get me.
Oh, perfect.
Both Batus.
Both Batus and the full range between Nubs and Andor, right? And everything else in between is Star Wars as we know it today. Jen, I throw this now to you. What do you think is the crowning achievement of Kennedy's tenure as president of Lucasfilm?
So I also had The Mandalorian at the top of my list, but I'm going to add on to what Greg said already, I'm going to be more specific and say, because being a good producer or kind of, strategic manager is identifying talent and putting people together, right? And so I think the pairing of Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau is pure magic. And, I think we can sort of see that, because you could argue that a lot of the limitations or things that people didn't like about Mando season 3 were because they were sort of separated for some of that, right? Or that Filoni was being pulled away on Ahsoka and other projects and stuff. And so I think that the two of them, and the fact that they have complementary skill sets and can feed off each other and learn from each other, and I think we have yet to see the potential of that collaboration, which is crazy because it's already been pretty great. And I have one other thing to say and I forgot now, but yes, that's what I would say, is that like I would like to credit her with saying, hey, you two would have a lot of fun making Star Wars together.
and I think that's probably correct too, or at least giving them the confidence to saying like, hey, I think this, remember that guy? You worked with him on Clone Wars. He did a couple voices here and there. Maybe you guys, or like, saying like, this guy has a lot of talent, but he's never done a live action thing. He's only done work in animation. Perhaps you could show him the ropes, or like give him a bit more of the keys to the castle, if you will, about the whole live action sense. And frankly, that marriage between Jon Favreau and Filoni, as you've noted, has paid off quite well in terms of the dividends. Mandalorian is heading straight to the cinema. Dave Filoni's got that Mandoverse movie coming eventually at some point. It's going to wrap this all up in some way, shape, or form. Ahsoka was a big success on Disney Plus. One of the few things getting a season 2 across all the Disney Plus things. And we'll get to this question a little bit later there, but perhaps the both of these guys got bright futures in this community and Lucasfilm business of it all moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, Mandalorian is a big success again, not only for Lucasfilm, but that thing kept Disney Plus afloat when they have that big launch November 2019, and then pandemic hits in March, and seemingly there's nothing coming out on that platform for quite some time as production shut down and people are at home. No one's going out to the cinema. Things are being pushed. Release dates. Black Widow felt like it got, in No Time to Die, got like 6 release dates at some point over the course of 2020 and 2021. And yet somehow The Mandalorian was able to get season 2 out during that time. And I think that was a really big success for them in order to push that through. And then figuring out how to do COVID scheduling and work that all out. I think that, this was a big endeavor for them. And I think that was a great win for Kathleen Kennedy over time, especially as we get into this kind of like that second phase, where that was kind of like, I would say, the start of that second phase of the tenure, the Disney Plus era. And I guess we're still kind of in it now, but it seemed very much so. There was like, all right, sequel trilogy, and then pandemic Disney Plus is like how you could define really the 2 eras of the Kathleen Kennedy time thus far. I will say I'm surprised no one said the greatest achievement is the wonderful film Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Shame on both of you. Bringing James Mangold into the fold and celebrating Indy was as a true delight there. I think that was a big win in my book, was finally finishing that story, because it had it been in the works for like, I think 2018 was the first release date, then 2019 Spielberg was attached to it. He wasn't. I'm a big fan of that, and they're actually able to make that work in Harrison Ford as an actor, an action actor in his early 80s, figuring that all out. I think that's a big win, and showcases ageism isn't a thing if you can push and through the barriers that we put on ourselves. That's a great thing that we can overcome. I will just say, just in terms of numbers, I think arguably her greatest achievement is the box office for Force Awakens. But I think that film, because of the hype surrounding it, I think some of the success was the fact that Lucas wasn't involved at the time. I think that played into it a bit. There were a lot of YouTubers at that time that was like, George isn't involved, yay, hooray. And the big three are back in some way. Didn't know at the time, but then there was that brief like month after The Force Awakens came out where everything was a true bliss as a Star Wars fan. There was nothing that could go wrong. There was no negative criticism, no voice in the room. No one was saying Mary Sue yet. The only thing was like Kylo Ren is emo, and I was like, I'll take it. this is fine. I'll take it. You know, you get Adam Driver on Saturday Night Live as Matt the Radar Technician in the time after that. That was a great time, and I don't want to say that she peaked early because of that, because obviously she had some big multi-billion-dollar films that have come after the fact. But that was, I mean, to talk about the brand, right, bringing it back into the cinema, we didn't think that there'd be an episode 7 after George was done. He was very adamant about Revenge of the Sith was it, and the fact that they were able to create a story and move it forward. And at least get it off start with The Force Awakens. That was a really special time. I remember it was a really wild time as a fan, of course, because that was back where spoiler culture, I mean, it's still a big thing now, but people were really out there spoiling the Han dies thing in The Force Awakens. So like I made it a big point to see the first showing that Thursday night at 7 p.m. For The Force Awakens to make sure I didn't get spoiled. But in the few days after that, it was like you couldn't imagine on my Facebook feed, you know, like I'd see like an ad for like Home and Garden TV for like a show that's coming up, and then I'd look in the comments and be like, Han dies. There'd be so many things that are just like Han dies. Oh, Han Solo's dead. Man, you guys are ruthless out here. Oh, to think that was such a time that once existed. Maybe we can get back to that one day. Oh, it would be great. But we've talked we've talked a lot about some positive things over the last little bit here. But the main reason that I brought you both here to this panel was in regards to that report that came out, I want to say about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, that was like Kathleen Kennedy is retiring. That was the report. She's looking to retire and they're finding a replacement. She's since come out and said, that's not happening. I'm having conversations, of course, with people as to like a succession plan, but like I'm not retiring from films anytime soon. And if and when I do step away from Lucasfilm, you'll all know about it from me directly. You won't hear about it via a leak, basically. And in that middle period there between Kathleen Kennedy setting the record straight and that initial report, there were a lot of people. I want to say a lot. There was a very vocal subset of I'm not even going to say fans, probably. They're not even fans of Star Wars, but there's a subset of people that are just like, they took to celebrating. It was basically a victory celebration for them in Return of the Jedi. It was they've been looking forward to this for years. And this is a group that is obsessed with Kathleen Kennedy and her quote unquote downfall. In preparation for this episode today, I did like a Kathleen Kennedy search on YouTube, and boy, some of those results were agonizingly painful to see, and they're getting millions and millions of views. Now, I'm not going to name any of those folks. I hope people don't even adventure off to look at them, because it was quite hard to look at. But Jen, I start with you here on this one. Why are they so obsessed with her and her downfall? What did she do to them?
Well, there's this thing called misogyny.
Yes, thank you.
And, no, so
call it out. No, please.
My kind
Hold on, Jen. I'll explain it.
You do that too often on our show. Stop it. It's the joke has been played out, Greg. Okay, so my anecdotal way into answering this, aside from stating the obvious, is that when I have had casual conversation about Star Wars with strangers, you know, and I literally wear a lot of Star Wars on my sleeve, sure. Right? Like I have, my wardrobe is kind of like putting it out there that people can talk to me about Star Wars. So I partially bring this on myself. But, you know, when someone starts asking me about Star Wars, as soon as they bring up two things, I start to become very skeptical. And one is, well, Kathleen Kennedy is ruining Star Wars, right? And then I'm like, okay. And then more specifically, the other red flag is, well, they made Rey so powerful because they needed to they wanted to have a strong female character, and that's the only reason. And having her power so quickly made no sense. Blah blah blah. And then I have and instead of like pointing to 5 other examples where Star Wars characters get their powers very quickly, or are powerful very quickly, those 2 things signal to me, oh, you are more invested in the rhetoric of the discourse that is surrounding Kathleen Kennedy as this like powerful female figure in Hollywood that we somehow need to blame for everything, as opposed to genuine criticism. And I think that like if you have criticism of something that has happened during Kathleen Kennedy's tenure, that is 100% acceptable. In fact, we have leveraged some of those criticisms in the past hour.
Yeah.
But I think if you are focused on somehow this conspiracy to like dilute Star Wars or change it in some way that it's unrecognizable, when really you just mean you don't like women, that the it's the very thinly veiled when that happens. I think it's and usually I kind of smile and nod and like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, like, and then I try to end the conversation as quickly as possible.
To move on.
Like, oh, okay, this is the conversation we're engaging in is like disingenuous, right? So I do think that is a big thing, and then and it only seems to have grown because of the internet, right? And the fire is constantly being fueled. So, and it's unfortunate, and it'd be curious to see how that may or may not shift depending on who succeeds her, right?
Yeah. I mean, thank you for calling a spade. For frankly, like, call it out. Like, this is exactly the answer. I think. Like, the question is, and then it adds another question to it: is like, why are men so threatened by women in positions of authority? That's a whole other topic and a whole other podcast that it could be done for centuries to explain that answer. But as we talked about, there's very fair criticisms of her over these years. Some okay, some not okay. Or I shouldn't say some okay, some in her control and some outside of her control versus what she can do. And then there were some big wins. And it's like this group is very much in the opinion that everything negative that has ever come out about Lucasfilm in the last 13 years is her fault. And then everything that is good that has happened in Lucasfilm is in spite of Kathleen Kennedy tearing it down, which is a ridiculous statement to even think about to begin with. But it's like every time something comes out, I see the YouTube algorithm already pushing me as a white male, the red laser beam Kathleen Kennedy eyes. I mean, if I hope people don't do it again, but I did for all of us already, the Google search, or not the Google, but the YouTube search of Kathleen Kennedy, just the name. And then it was just video of just red laser beam eyes. Kathleen Kennedy's ruining Star Wars. Laugh. Horrible things. And I think there's a question about why is the algorithm so much rewarding of bad takes and misogyny and negativity versus positivity. Like, shouldn't there be like 3 million views for a show for an episode that's like Kathleen Kennedy rocks, here are some great things she's done over the years, versus feeding hate? That's wild. But Greg, do you have any other thoughts to add to this portion?
My answer on my piece of paper is misogyny as well. Yes. Because I do think it's absolutely important. I have I live in Boston, and I love a lot of Boston sports teams, but a lot of Boston sports fans are super racist. And I demand that my family, who loves those teams, calls out the racist parts of fandom. And I think that I have to hold us to the same standard. So I just want to add my voice that there are very toxic parts of fandom. And you're right, Anthony, to point out that they've made a lot of money off of it.
Too much
there
money.
Was too much. And I always think of, in one of the documentaries about the January 6th stuff, one of the awful militia people had like a Grogu Funko Pop behind him in his straight to cameras. And so like now I see that like every time there's something awful, I'm like, that guy. Like, I remember that guy's out there in the mix somewhere. But I will add to that, trying to because I do think there's just the horrible toxic people, and they're not worth our oxygen. But I do think there are some people who had trouble understanding the way Star Wars changed at the moment Kathleen took over. And the best way I have to kind of empathize with that is, it was not cool to be a Star Wars fan for a very long time. And, you know, I've said elsewhere recently, like, I was not bullied in some kind of dramatic way or anything, but I was not one of the cool kids being the Star Wars kid, right? Or having my Decipher card game or what have you. And so that felt very hard to be a Star Wars fan. And then at the moment that Kathleen takes over and Force Awakens comes out and then Mandalorian, everybody's a Star Wars fan, right? Like, I think about how rarely I used to see a Star Wars t-shirt, and now when you go outside on a hot day, it's much more rare not to see one.
You see red Millennium Falcon shirt everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, the beauty. I still have mine. And so I think that kind of coincided with this moment where it's like, you know, what was small and an intimate community branched way out. And unfortunately, some people read that as, oh, now there are women here, or now there are people of color here. Spoiler, they were there at the beginning. They've been there the whole time.
We've been here the whole time.
And so people just kind of read that feeling the wrong way, and the darkest possible way, and they made Kathleen the figurehead of that, because it was under her that suddenly the cast gets more diverse, and we get, you know, queer characters in Star Wars, and we get all these other matters of representation happening. And, you know, my rant on Rebel Base Card was based on the fact that my favorite moment of this was when they announced Indiana Jones 5. No, okay, no.
Cue the sound.
This is torture. This is torture. I can't play the music.
Like, my first like post I'm reading about it, I get down to the comments, and the first person's like, Kathleen Kennedy, it's gonna be woke garbage since she's involved. And I'm like, she's been involved the whole time.
She's literally since Raiders.
She's been there. Yeah, she's there. She's been a part of this. And it just showed me again that these were not serious people. These were people who who saw the world changing around them and reacted negatively because they felt they were getting left out. And they were going to lash out to make sure everybody knew that it was supposed to be their thing. And again, I know a lot of really well-meaning fans who actually kind of instinctively react that way a lot, because it was a big change in the lifetime of a lot of current fans, that this went from being a small community to being something so expansive. And I think the best of us, obviously the three of us on this call, kind of welcome everybody in. And it's like, yes, it is great. And you can love it. And it's so wonderful. And yeah, I get that now you can create content. You know, I see these Instagram posts all the time, and it's like, people don't realize that blah, blah, blah. I'm like, everybody knows that. And I'm like, no, not everybody knows that, right? Like, you know, these facts about what the deleted scenes are in A New Hope, right? I just saw a fresh one today. It's like, there was a scene with Biggs. And it's like, yeah, everybody knows that. Then I'm like, no, not everybody knows that. And people who are new to this fandom deserve to have the revelation the way I did over a magazine in 96 or whenever it was. And, you know, it's still fresh and vibrant. So I think it's just unfortunate that people misunderstand that feeling, but I do think, you know, it's just never, because it's profitable, it's never going to stop. So it relies on all of us to shout it over it as much as we can.
Yeah. It's okay. Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say the helpful analogy that I thought of when you so brilliantly gave us this question was how we interpret the Constitution. And because if you think about sort of the different philosophical approaches that different, like, say, Supreme Court justices or something could take, it feels like we've gone the fandom that has the most problems with Kathleen Kennedy seem to be kind of coming from this originalism perspective, right? Of like, we the original trilogy, what is the foundational text, and anything that's kind of different than that, we reject, right? Or like, we have to base every new thing against the original text, and in order to and preserve as much as we can kind of the original intent that may or may not be behind that original text. And the opposite, or on the other side of that, is living constitutionalism, right? Where it's like, well, you know, back in 17 whatever, right, they wrote this, but they they probably meant it for this reason that was very context specific, right? Whereas we now live in a different time, in a different culture, in different historical context, and we have to kind of adapt and change as accordingly, and grow and evolve. And the text that we kind of look to has to grow and evolve with that, along with our interpretation of it. And so I think that is a lot of the tension, is like, if you feel like anything outside of that might possibly conflict in any way with the original trilogy, then suddenly you're calling out something as being not authentic, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right there. I mean, people gotta recognize that Star Wars: A New Hope, 1977, was filmed and released primarily in 1977. So it is a product of the late 70s, and therefore has all of the isms of film production in the late 70s, especially production done largely in Britain at Pinewood. So like, there aren't a lot of people of color. There aren't necessarily a lot of women. And that's what they'll say, like, they weren't there in the original trilogy. And it's like, well, people were fans of, women still bought tickets. People of color bought tickets to go see Star Wars. It didn't become the largest film of all time just because only white people in Nebraska went to go see it. It was a large global conglomerate. We're having Star Wars Celebration in Japan this year. It's a global thing. Right? People deserve to celebrate Star Wars across the globe, and it's got to have something for everybody. And that's the importance of representation. And like you said, living up to the modern times. How could the founding fathers have ever anticipated that there'd be weapons that shot more than perhaps twice a minute? if you were an expert at doing that, they had no fathom whatsoever that there could be such a thing as a machine gun. They'd say, what? And that's why you have things updated appropriately for the times. And I think so far Star Wars has been a great representation of that, while keeping the substance of the original intact, and taking the good stuff from it, but also changing, like, not necessarily changing in terms of the content itself. George did that, perhaps, and depending on your viewpoint on that one, but it is updated to reflect society as we are today. And I think that is the thing that people are somehow rebelling against, when they feel themselves theoretically falling lower on the totem pole in terms of importance and all of that. They lash out and rebel. And this is seemingly Kathleen Kennedy, when you come out wearing a shirt saying the Force is female, you become target number one when it comes to that type of group. Even though, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Jen. I didn't prepare you for this question ahead of time, but I want to ask, how does this group reconcile the hatred of Kennedy now, or the negative push and feedback, while now uplifting George, when in 2012 they were the ones calling for him to get out? The revisionist history is an interesting thing, and I want to hear if you have any thoughts about that. Like, I will say, Greg, you said you weren't bullied. I was ardently bullied in elementary school for loving the prequels, and people of the original trilogy would be like, oh, you like the prequels? You're not even a fan. You don't know what a good movie is. And I had to tell people I would slyly change how I told people I'm a Star Wars fan, where I'd say, like, yeah, I like the saga. I would say stuff like that, while secretly getting people to, without having to say, like, yes, I love episodes 1, 2, and 3, because that would invite a conversation where they would start yelling at me. That was my way of saying, like, yes, I'm open to talk about it if you are. Now I know nowadays people are like, prequelists unite, but now they're uplifting those films that they were bashing on tremendously, and celebrating George in a way that they really didn't do while he was still in Lucasfilm. So Jen, how do you reconcile that?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just transposing the originalism, right?
Yeah.
Of like, well, this was the prequels were the only thing available that we could hate on because they're different, and now we have something else,
or something
right?
else, right? It just moves on.
Though I would be really curious to, I don't know, like to see demographic information about how much overlap there is really between those two groups, because I do feel like part of it is generational too, in terms of especially in terms of, folks that were closet fans of the prequels and are now like have come out and been like, no, it's safe to like these things now. Versus like the is it really the same group of people just voicing the hate at a different person for a different reason. I'd be really curious to see, or I don't know if there's a way for us to figure that out, but yeah, that would, my knee-jerk reaction is kind of like, it has to be just they need something to yell at, and
when it's Kathleen Kennedy today, it's She-Hulk tomorrow. It's something like, it's just whatever it is that they'll just grab their eye or two. Greg, any ruminations on this one?
Oh, kind of related to what I already said. There's another evolution that's gone on, both the prequel moment and then the Kathleen Kennedy era, is that I think a lot of people went from being, I'm a Star Wars person, I love all of Star Wars, to I like this part of Star Wars. And I think that is a really tricky transition. And you know, I actually always think of my father-in-law, who saw A New Hope and then didn't care for Empire. Kind of gave up early.
Hey,
like,
my stepdad's the same way.
It was like, that was it. Like, yeah, it didn't really capture it. It didn't really work for me a second time. And, you know, I do think that so many of us, you know, again, I mean, when I was like in the 90s, it was like, are you Star Wars or are you Star Trek? Like, this is a blood feud. Like, and it's like, that seems so stupid now. I mean, it was always stupid, but I do think that, like, being like, I'm a Star Wars person, and then being like, I kind of don't like that one piece of Star Wars, is a really kind of a hard emotional moment. So it is, and I think Jen said it right. It's like generational. It seems that like everybody comes to that moment where there's something they don't like, and you have to decide. I haven't gotten there yet. I'm trying. We'll see if I find something eventually, but I'll get there.
Stay tuned, folks. The real third answer there, Greg, when it was Star Trek versus Star Wars, you should have said, well, I offer a third option here. Stargate Atlantis
Yes.
or SG-1. Get Stargate in there. That's where the real winners are. We're fans of Stargate. Well, just, you know, Kathleen Kennedy won't always be in Lucasfilm forever, right? Time catches up to all of us, and you know, although she's going to still make films probably until the day she drops off the face of the earth, you know, she's also going to transition at some point. It's just inevitable. We all will retire one day from our jobs. At least she won't always want to be the head of Lucasfilm. She'll want to, you know, leave, get a large sum of money, and then start her own museum at some point too. At this moment, let's start with you, Greg, here. Who would you like to see as her successor?
Well, I'd like to put my name forward.
This is a new twist. I didn't expect this experience.
I think you can tell from my history of movie podcasting, I have a lot of expertise and can clearly. I am a man and I am white, so I guess I'll satisfy that one part of fandom.
You did score 17 out of 23 on your Oscar predictions this year, so you know, it's pretty good. He knows the industry, folks.
Well, so what I want to answer for seriously is, I want to, of course, say that I have a lot of respect for Dave Filoni, but I don't see it. And what it comes down for me is that is a totally different skill set. Everything I love about what Dave Filoni can do makes sense as a creative officer or the head of a story group or something. But though he's done producing, I don't think he is at the level of what is going to be required.
Sure.
And with respect to him. And then that gets me to the other half of the golden duo. I kind of think it has to be Favreau.
Okay.
And the reason is because he has been around the industry for a very long time. He's totally money and he doesn't even know it, all the way back to Swingers. And then he also has that kind of George ILM, because we forget that the head of Lucasfilm has to kind of run ILM, right? And Skywalker Sound, right?
Yep.
And so I think Favreau has proven with his devotion to like the Jungle Book and the Lion King that he cares about innovative film technology, and of course overseeing the volume in the Mandalorian and so on. It is interesting to me that Favreau was at the start of the MCU, but didn't take on that kind of role there, and kind of let others take on that role. And even before Feige, right, he kind of did his piece and then passed on. But you know, it's hard to picture anybody taking over for Kathleen. But of the crop that we know of, if it's somebody within the company or somebody already related to Lucasfilm, I think it's got to be Favreau for my money.
Okay, Favreau, Greg Cass. some names thrown into the hat.
You know, it's two equal candidates. So, like, what are you gonna do?
Jen,
Not vote for one of us?
Are you throwing your name into the ring too?
No. No way.
Maybe, Jen, this means you should get the role because
I don't
those
need
who
that kind of
don't
heat.
want power should be given it.
Yeah.
Right. It's the Jon Snow argument, right? I don't want it.
Come on, where's your northern United Kingdom accent on that one?
I know, yeah, non-existent. That's what it is. So I feel like, to counter sort of what Greg said, I feel like he's on the right track because really, like, realistically, Jon Favreau and or Dave Filoni are the most realistic candidates.
Mm-hmm.
But I would I kind of want them to keep making stuff as opposed to being in charge of the people making stuff. And so that's my only hesitation. And I do think to be the president of Lucasfilm, you have to have both it helps to have the handle on Star Wars' identity in the way that someone like Dave Filoni clearly does. Like, he's my favorite person to listen to just talking about Star Wars. Apologies to everyone on this call, but like, but I could hear him monologuing about what Star Wars is and what all the connections to everything in the saga are and everything like that all day. So I do think in that sense, he's the creative successor that would make a lot of sense. But at the same time, does he have that kind of like strategic business kind of producer hat? Is he going to be able to not go crazy when he's trying to work with all the Disney executives, right?
True.
So I would say if we have one, we have to have both, because I think they do balance. They would make a good team. But I really tried to think outside the box with this question, and this is never going to happen. But what I settled on was Emma Thomas and Christopher Nolan.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And
that's outside the box. I like it.
And again, they're never going to happen. They have their own stuff going on. They're doing quite well. They have no need to take this on. But when I think about what they have managed to achieve, if you look at their filmography that they have kind of tag teamed as Emma Thomas as the producer and Christopher Nolan as the director, like, they really know how to toe the line between big blockbuster spectacle and prestige storytelling, right? And I feel like that is what Star Wars really needs to kind of propel it into its next era. And that's what people are hungry for. Right. And, so they would be able to do the big budgets, but still maintain the focus on character. They won an Oscar for Oppenheimer, right? Like, they know how to do this. But like, name another couple that has done both comic book movies and historical fiction, historical
fact.
Yeah, fact. Sorry, I don't know.
Non-fiction.
I got into this trouble with Conclave too, but in the opposite direction. What's the historical, what's the genre I'm trying to think of? Oh no, I've lost all my anyway. Historical narrative? No, historical. Anyway, like a biopic, like a historical biopic.
Dramatization.
Thank you, Greg. Anyway, so I got too excited by this, and that's why the rational thought has gone out the window. But that was kind of like, if I had to choose anybody, I think, a lot of people talk about, we need Christopher Nolan to direct a Bond movie. I think his talents may be wasted on that. Right? I think we need to think bigger. Anyway, and the other one, in terms of, I have no sense as to whether or not her resume would make her a good fit for the job. But if I'm picking someone in this current Star Wars pantheon, I'm going with Bryce Dallas Howard, because I think that she's, like, if you go back and listen to podcasts of a lot of the different, like Mando, Book of Boba, like, everyone always singles her out as, like, what episodes were great? The Bryce Dallas Howard episodes. And so I think she's, she's got the Nepo baby connections, right? She has like a really good sensibility about what Star Wars is and what Star Wars can be. Her work in Star Wars always maintains the sense of heart, which I think is really important. But again, not knowing whether or not she's at all qualified for the job that Kathleen Kennedy has, I would maybe go with her.
Hey, throw her hat in the ring too. Throw that Bryce Dallas Howard. That'd be awesome. I think the Chris Nolan Emma Thomas would be another outside the box, but a big win. I think there'd be a lot of people happy across the internet about that one until they release a movie, and then the whole crowd will be begging for Kathleen Kennedy to come back. We'll see the whole cycle for come back again. There was if anybody's watched the behind the scenes for the making of Rise of Skywalker, there's a great documentary on there, and it seemed like at one point there was a woman by the name of Michelle Rejwan who was like the head of development at Lucasfilm, and it seemed like pre-pandemic and a little bit during the pandemic that she was kind of being poised to take over the role at some point, because she had been doing that producing work that Kennedy had been doing for all of the projects. She's since left that role at Lucasfilm. I think she has a role at Disney doing something live action, so I don't know if that's like further trying to expand her repertoire and that whole deal. But I think, Jen, you noted that like there's the production of Star Wars and the knowledge of Star Wars, but someone in this role is also a middle person having to deal with the mouse looming overhead too, where they have to deal with the shareholders, the investor calls, the parks, talking to the Imagineers about future offerings that they can have, right? Oh no, we have to talk about new additions to the cruise line. Oh, that's my Tuesday right there. I can't focus on the films that are being done there. So there's a whole other business side of things that this person is going to need to be responsible for as well. So yeah, it'd be great to have a Filoni, a Favreau in this role, but can they handle that other side too? Now that's I think we're all kind of in a point here where maybe Filoni's a bit too green for that yet. He needs to get his hands on actually producing a film first, and releasing that to the world. So maybe after the Mando verse film comes out in a few years, perhaps maybe he'll be more situated for that. But I think realistically, the Favreau of it all might be the person perhaps most keenly this day. Now, it might be someone that we're not even thinking of. Could you imagine the internet, a blaze that the internet would have if it's a Rian Johnson that's announced as it, or maybe a J.J. Abrams? I mean, they both could be theoretically up for the role if they want it with their work on the sequel trilogy. Maybe even a Ron Howard could throw it if you want to do the stage to then get Bryce ready for such a role. I don't know.
Who's the head of Lucasfilm Animation? Like, who took Dave Filoni's old job? Because realistically,
I took a picture with her. I took a picture with her at D23. Vamp for a moment. I'll get you this answer here. This person is. Okay, hold on. Depending on how long this takes, I'll edit it out.
Greg, I'll ask you a question. If Kevin Feige were to take over, how would you feel about
that? That's a good question. He seems like he kind of wants it in some ways, right? Like he's always alluding to his love of Star Wars, and then there was the rumor that he had a movie that was getting developed as a part of that. I think that sets the expectations too high. And, when we were talking about the struggles Kathleen has had, I think Feige has, had all those same struggles, and kind of they're very parallel in terms of what's gotten in their way and how they've struggled. So I don't think I would be really stoked if he took it over. I kind of like him where he is, and I think he should just kind of retire.
Yeah.
When Anthony mentioned Ron Howard, I was like, well, he's too old. And I was like, I have no idea how old any of these people are, right? Like, I think Ron Howard always seems a little older because he's been in the Hollywood limelight for so long, and he certainly has had a strong producing career. I think that would be more of a lateral move from Imagine to Lucasfilm than a promotion. So
that's true.
But I same thing with Feige. Feige looks like you could tell me he's 32 and you could tell me he's 62. I don't really know. And if only there was some kind of giant network of computers that would have the answer to that question. But since no such thing exists, I'll say keep him where he is. I was also thinking a lot about James Gunn in this discussion, not as a candidate, but him getting moved to the head of DC. Like, I think there's a lot that we're gonna try to wait and see what happens with it, like how strong it is a move, but that is more akin, in my estimation, more akin to Filoni getting the job. And, it'll be interesting to see if you can take a purely creative person and, like Anthony was saying, send them to the business meetings. Maybe you can, maybe you can't.
Well, that's an interesting case too that you bring up, because he's technically a co-head too with Peter Safran, who is dubbed the business guy. So he's not really necessarily in those business meetings, or at least handling like the contracts that need to get done to like hire talent and deal with agents and all that stuff. So maybe that could be again, depending on the success of that situation moving forward, that could be hire the creative, hire the hire the person to do the business meetings and handle that. But in the meantime, I did get my picture up. That is Athena Portillo. Portillo,
yes,
who is the vice president of animation at Lucasfilm currently, with no announcement of aside from Visions. Technically, there's no announcement of the next animated project. So who knows what they got cooking on over there? They did tease us at D23 that there's so much more to come, but who knows? Who knows what that is? And it's been months since then. If only there was something next month where it would be a great place for them to announce whatever the next thing is. But they've announced the panels for that. I don't think they're gonna announce anything big. It's not really in their forte to announce stuff at Star Wars Celebration, but that's a conversation for a different day. We're at our last question here, folks. So this is all about the ultimate legacy of Kathleen Kennedy. We've done a lot of conversation about her successes, the challenges she's faced. We've celebrated her throughout this time. And ultimately, again, like her legacy has been interesting, to say the least. So what do you think, Jen? We'll start with you on this closing one here. What do you think will be the ultimate legacy of Kathleen Kennedy? How do you think the fandom of Lucasfilm will remember her tenure?
I think her legacy will be one of growth and revitalization, because if you really think about the bigger picture of what she has done, whether or not individual moves made you like or don't like, or decisions, but I think holistically she has taken Star Wars to the stratosphere in terms of like ubiquity. Like I've heard Greg alone on multiple podcasts be like, how lucky are we that we get all this Star Wars content, right? Coming from the dark times, and now this, like, let's pinch me, like, how is this possible? And she's largely responsible for that, right? Like the fact that, and earlier we were talking about the Force Awakens. I think if that did not set the tone, regardless of how people felt by the end of the sequel trilogy, if that does not set the tone of like Star Wars is back and we want more now, right? It's new again. I think the enthusiasm for that is one that has multiplied over the years, and to get us to where we are today. So I think ultimately, and especially more as like the documents become unclassified, and we learn more about what happened on various productions and projects. Like I would like to think that she will be remembered well.
I think so. I at least that's my hope, that she will as well. Like, I think that's exactly right. I loved everything you just said there. In a different way of putting it, she saved Star Wars. Like, it was doomed to just being robot chicken specials, like I said before, and Star Wars detours. Go check those out on YouTube. It's something. Like, that was going to be it. George didn't have it in his heart to really move things forward anymore because of the backlash from fans, and that was really all he was willing to do. So, like you said, put it back on the map and threw it into the stratosphere, and gave us this template for Star Wars moving forward, that like they are still big budget productions and something to be proud of, and continues to push canon and representation in meaningful ways moving forward. Like, this is definitely a hallmark of her tenure, despite all of the challenges and criticism that she's faced, right? You'll still have, we'll be the ones here saying like she saved Star Wars, but there's 1,000 YouTube videos out there. They're like, Kathleen Kennedy killed and ruined Star Wars. How can both of those be true at the same time? They're obviously not. She's definitely saved Star Wars, and it's going to be moving into the future. Even when she's long gone, it's going to be continuing to go and grow, and these characters can't be forgotten or overlooked. They're not just going to brush them aside, right? Like Rey Skywalker is a character, Finn is a character, Poe Dameron are characters that are going to be hopefully involved with Star Wars moving forward and well and beyond in the future. And I think that'll be a great legacy that she helped set when taking over. Greg, take us out here with this final, with your thoughts on this question. What do you think the legacy of Kathleen Kennedy will be?
So there's this movie, I don't know if you guys have seen. It's called Return of the Jedi.
Okay, I've
and
heard of it.
There's check it out. It's pretty good. If your parents let you watch it. I don't know if they're still making the calls or not.
Yeah. Fortunately, I was allowed to watch Star Wars, but no, actually, I don't think I was ever allowed to watch Star Wars. I think it was one of those, my uncle showed it to me, and then it was like genie's out of the bottle now.
Yeah, that's me and The Simpsons.
Also, that was my thing too. Yeah.
Well, so one of the things I love about Return of the Jedi is that Luke Skywalker's heroism is the rejection of the machine and the valuing of humanity. And, I think of my beloved Obi-Wan Kenobi, who says he's more machine now than man. And there is a chance in Lucasfilm getting sucked up into the Disney Corporation that Lucasfilm becomes more machine now than man. And I thought Jen made a really good point earlier about the bringing together of Filoni and Favreau.
Yeah.
And we have all three of us named so many people at work within this company. And so I think Kathleen's legacy is bringing the humanity to Star Wars and making sure that we understand that these are creative endeavors done by humans, and they aren't purely for profit. Of course, they're partially for profit. That's just what it is. But the messaging out of Lucasfilm, one of my favorite things they ever created truly is, one of the celebration introduction videos, which ends with Carrie saying it's about family, and that's what makes it so powerful. And I think Kathleen has brought that ethos to the company and who she brings on to work there, and that everybody believes in their people. I think of somebody, and I say this with all love and admiration, like Leland Chi, who's like the dorkiest of dorks in the best possible way. His job is to maintain a database of all the things. And like, he will pop on to social media and be like, oh, you like Neil? Here are all the different elephant species that we have, and they're in my database. And like, that is somebody who none of us should ever know. And I know Leland Chi predates Kathleen, just in case somebody started making a video of me with red laser eyes. But I do think that like we continued to know all these people as we got into this giant corporation. I say all the time, like, I'm not a Disney person, I'm a Star Wars person, but like now I'm kind of a Disney person because that's just the relationship
the names.
that there is. Yeah, and so we know all this, and we care about these people, and every single time there's some new Star Wars, we get a new director, we get a new writer, and we make sure that those people are at the highlight. This afternoon is the perfect example. Kathleen wasn't introducing Andor season 1 and saying, look at all the great things we did. It was here's Tony Gilroy, here's Ash Crossan, and we'll get a few of the actors in just to make sure people feel like they get their money's worth on the free YouTube stream. And like, that's what I remember about Andor. Like, Kathleen is absolutely responsible for Andor, but I think of it as the Tony Gilroy show. And it's so incredible because that's who's at the front of it, and he's brought his expertise. So so Kathleen believes in the humanity of telling stories and of creating good art. And gosh, I almost swore, but we sure could use that right now. We could definitely use that in this world right now. So I'm glad we have it.
Absolutely. George handpicked her for a reason. I think that might be probably one of the big reasons why, because she's able to find the humanity in the stories and in the people that are working behind the scenes and uplifting them to tell the stories that they want to tell, and then pushing back on when there's areas of like, I'm not sure this will work. And that's why they have a full team. The story group is there to like help steward them along. And they created structures at Lucasfilm that, George was like, I don't care about the books. And then she was immediately like, yeah, the books count. They're canon. It's all connected. The comics matter. And, you can debate that over the years, how much that it's held up and all that. But largely, I think it's still been a stewardship pretty well executed as through all these challenges, turmoils, and tribulations that have happened. And ultimately, we're still getting Star Wars. And if you don't like the Star Wars that came out this past week, well, just wait a few weeks and there might be something else for you in this vast galaxy far, far away that might hit you in a different way and remind you of those warm, fuzzy feelings when you were 7 years old watching it for the first time again. And that's all we can frankly hope for.
Amen.
Well, folks, that is our celebration of Kathleen Kennedy. Thank you both to Jen and Greg so much for coming along and taking these hard, tough questions and really just thank you from the bottom of my heart for having just this lively, wonderful conversation, an honest conversation too about the last 13 years of Lucasfilm here. So it's been really, really fruitful. I think we have really talked at great length about where the successes are and where challenges could have been that she might have been able to mitigate, and just what's the reality of the situation over the last couple of years here. Jen, take us out here. Where can the folks find you online if they want to continue the conversation or hear some of your other work?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me on the show. To be honest, I had a little bit of a rough day with teaching, and so to end the day with this was such a joy. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And you can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, Sopchockchai, and you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen, and you could find both the podcast, which I'm going to let Greg talk about, so he has something to talk about, and the long take review, and my written reviews. Right now, I'm trying to cover Daredevil week to week, and when Andor season 2 comes around, I'm going to be covering that week to week. Though, it's 3 episodes at a time, right?
A full movie.
I have to figure out how to do that.
Week to week to week, and then you're done.
Yep,
yeah,
just
like
like
that. So
1 month of just letting it all out. You're good to go.
Pure insanity, no sleep. But though you can find all of that at thelongtake.substack.com.
Wonderful. And Greg, Jen has already given you a little bit of a spoiler on where else they can find you. But tell us where else the listeners can find you and listen to your wonderful podcasts.
Well, as always, a pleasure. And just while we're on air, I want to say nice things that Anthony is always good about reaching out and talking about Long Take Review. And we really appreciate the feedback and just knowing somebody else is out there. We're dying to know which person on the movie thing you are.
Yeah.
The
are
Vulture.
you're these are not the movies you're looking for? Is that you?
That's not me.
No.
Oh, no.
Oh,
what was
we
the other
still
one?
don't know who it is. You're not. You look
there
like
were
you're
two,
not playing
there
at
are
all.
there are two people
Yeah.
there are two people who have Star Wars names, like screen names.
And they're fans, and you were our bet. So
No,
we lost that.
I don't even know what you're talking about. So
what? Okay, well we gotta get you in on that for next year.
Yes,
for sure.
Definitely. So people can find me on social media at EyeOnCanon, EyeOnCanon, and then I co-host a pretty fun movie podcast called The Long Take Review, which you can find wherever you get fresh podcasts. And we just wrapped up season 2 with the Oscars, and we're starting fresh. We are going to have our hype draft soon. We're definitely going to have to talk about Mickey 17 because I have a lot of questions I need answered. And I'm going to start lobbying for basically every movie coming out this year because there's a lot of good stuff ahead to discuss.
That's right. It's an exciting season. The summer blockbuster season is just around the corner, folks. And, a couple of anniversary things are coming up. Revenge of the Sith has got a 20th anniversary. It seems like Pride and Prejudice is also coming back to theaters for a week. That same week, the theaters are bustling again with the new and old content. It's a wild time. And folks, I do want to put in a plug. Go check out some of their past episodes if you've been catching up with some of the films that you may have, if you watch the Oscars, and maybe you're like, I'm into Anora, or I watched A Complete Unknown. Jen, Greg, and team at the Long Take Review have done episodes on every Best Picture nominee at this point, and then a few of the ancillary ones. I was just listening to the Flow episode today before we hopped on. So go check it out. It's always a fun podcast, and you guys have great conversations about all the things in the film world, and always have an eye towards the award season, which is always a wonderful thing too, which I greatly admire and appreciate. And folks, thank you. I also want to spoil something too, because while I got both of them on the show here, Jen and Greg are also going to be coming back on separately for our 20th anniversary Revenge of the Sith conversations that we'll be doing in just a couple weeks here. So be on the lookout for that. Just a light spoiler for those listening at home still. And we'll be actually back next week with a brand new episode about something in the Star Wars and Lucasfilm adjacent galaxy. And until then, may the Force be with you. Take care.